Good afternoon, everybody. I will call the Environment Committee to order. This is Peter Lindstrom. And first order of business is to read off the executive order statement. Governor
Actually,
Walz.
Chair,
Yeah.
we should do attendance
A roll call. Yes, please. Thank you.
Fredson,
Here.
Sterner has not joined us yet, but he had mentioned that he will be here. Vento,
Here.
Wolf,
Here.
Zarin, Councilmember Zarin. And you may have to post in chat if you're having audio issues.
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, thank you. And Lindstrom?
Hello, hello.
Hello. And I also just see that Councilmember Sterner just joined us. So thank you very much.
Great. And that takes us to the emergency executive order declared by Governor Walz. He has declared a peacetime emergency in response to COVID-19, and the Metropolitan Council Chair has determined it is not practical or prudent to conduct an in-person meeting for reasons stated in the Governor's emergency executive order. Accordingly, committee members will participate in this meeting via telephone or other electronic means, and the meeting will be conducted under Minnesota statutes section 13D.021 at the date and time stated above. We encourage you to monitor the meeting remotely. If you have comments, we encourage members of the public to email us at public.info@metc.state.mn.us, and we will respond to your comments in a timely manner. All righty, onward. We have an amended agenda this afternoon. I believe it has been sent to you, and it will be posted tomorrow with all the associated materials. Two projects, two interceptor related projects. So without objection, we will move forward with our approved agenda. Next up, we have some minutes from April 27th, 2021. Is there a motion to approve those minutes?
Wolf moves approval.
Bento seconds.
Roll call.
Fredson,
Aye.
Sterner, Sterner, we cannot hear you. You may need to post in the chat.
Can you hear me now? Or
No.
still no?
Councilmember
Okay,
Sterner, no, we cannot hear you.
Okay.
You are breaking up. So you may have to use the chat if you could to indicate your approval. I will move on. Bento,
Aye.
Wolf,
Aye.
Zarin,
Aye. Zarin's aye.
thank you, and Lindstrom.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you. And that takes us to the non-consent business agenda, where we have 4 items dealing with, 3 dealing with interceptors, 1 dealing with acquisition of real property in Shakopee or near Shakopee. Is there a motion to approve the non-consent?
Actually,
I'm sorry. No, I'm sorry. I was getting my consent and non-consent all mixed up here. So those are items that we are going to be taking one by one. So so we have first up, large diameter interceptor cleaning. Sorry about that. Mr. Schwartz.
That's quite all right. Thank you, Mr. Chair. My name is Jeff Schwartz. I'm the Minneapolis Area Program Manager for the MCS Interceptor Engineering Department. I'm here to present business item 2021-114, which is a request to award and execute a contract to clean about 2.5 miles of large diameter interceptor over a 3-year period. Next slide, please. In 2013 and 2014, MCS inspected the 9 large diameter interceptors shown here in Minneapolis and St. Paul. Large diameter interceptors are generally 4 feet in diameter or greater. They have medium to high wastewater flows and are too deep to clean with conventional jetting equipment. 33 miles of large diameter interceptor were inspected through 138 different access structures over the 2-year period. The inspection included field observations, closed circuit televising, and collection of sonar data. Next slide, please. The equipment platform floated down the interceptors to conduct the closed circuit televising and collect sonar data as shown on the right. Televising records were used to assess the conditions of the pipes. Sonar data was graphed to show debris depths and wastewater flow levels in the interceptors and to calculate debris volumes. The red lines inside the pipe cross sections on the graph shown here show debris levels. The blue lines show wastewater flow levels. Next slide, please. A cleaning contract was awarded in 2017 to begin the cleaning process. That contract will expire in the next few months. The typical jetter system used during that contract is shown on the left. They need about 200 feet and 1.5 lanes of traffic to set up. The grit debris shown at the top right is what is removed by the jetter. Debris too large to be jetted is shown on the bottom right, and that's removed by hand. Only 2 contractors across the country were pre-qualified to do this work because the pipes are up to 10 and 12 foot in size. The work is done under live sewage flow, and entry is through maintenance holes up to 110 feet deep. We also require the contractor to use recycled wastewater for jetting rather than clean water. Altogether, about 4,100 tons of debris were removed from a little over 3 miles of pipe over the last 4 years. Next slide, please. The pipe segments to be cleaned under the current contract are shown here. There are about 2.5 miles of pipe between 6 sites on 4 different interceptors. Next slide, please. The bid results were as follows. There were 2 contractors pre-qualified to bid. 1 pre-qualified bid was received, and Deutsch Environmental Services was the lowest responsible bidder at $11,955,000 and $680. Next slide, please. The proposed action is that the Metropolitan Council authorize its regional administrator to award and execute a contract for Phase 2 large diameter interceptor cleaning, Project 819016, Contract 21P000 to Deutsch Environmental Services for cleaning 12,500 feet of interceptor pipe in an amount not to exceed $11,955,680. Next slide, please. Thank you, Mr. Chair. At this time, I can answer any questions. And if any questions come up later, my contact information is listed here.
Chair Lindstrom.
Chair, you are actually muted, I believe.
Yes, I am. I am muted. Sorry about that. Councilmember Zirin.
Thank you, Chair Lindstrom. I just want to go back to page 4 here, large debris removal. I'm going to ask the obvious question, how in the world does objects like that, of that size, get in there?
Mr. Chair, Committee members, that's a very good question. That's just an example of some of the stuff that's coming out of there. A lot of times, there's broken castings, or there was a construction project that happened, that things got washed down. There's stories of all kinds of large stuff going out. One of the trouble is that you can't just pull that kind of things out with vacuum, so people do have to go in there and get that. So I don't imagine that a lot of that happens these days, but these pipes haven't been cleaned for some of them 100 years. So it is amazing what's in there.
You might find something from a crime scene from 1921.
Very possibly.
It's pretty fascinating that there's only 2 companies in the nation that do this type of work. I guess it's very specialized to climb down 110 feet in an active sewage tunnel or pipe and do this effectively and have all the right equipment and know-how to make it happen. Any other questions?
Wolf moves
Seeing-
approval.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Fredson will second.
Roll call, please.
Fredson,
Aye.
Sterner. And Councilmember Sterner, you may need to vote in the chat. I will move on. Vento?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you, Councilmember Sterner. Wolf,
Aye.
Zarin,
Aye.
Lindstrom.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Up next, we have acquisition of property for the Shakopee Interceptor odor improvements project.
And thank you very much, Chair Lindstrom.
Welcome.
Nice to be here. And I want to present this business item tonight to discuss the acquisition of real property for Shakopee Interceptor odor improvements, project number 809510. And next slide. So we have been in planning stages for the last year for an increase. What we've seen is an increase in odor complaints in the city of Shakopee, primarily due to new development that's starting to get closer and closer to our interceptor system. There's 2 areas in which we have observed odor issues. The first of these is at the end of a very long force main discharge from L71 that serves Chaska, and we get quite a bit of hydrogen sulfide generation from that force main, and it's released from the discharge right at the end of the green line. There's predominant east-west line there shown in the graphic. The 9206-2 interceptor in red receives that flow, and we get quite a bit of a release of hydrogen sulfide at that area. As the sewage flow moves across the city of Shakopee, it joins with interceptor 60, or actually 7120, that comes in from the south and heads north towards the Blue Lake Wastewater Treatment Plant. And right there where it's shown as odor area improvements number 2, that's an area where we have basically 2 siphons, one that crosses a perennial stream and another one that crosses the highway as the flow comes into the Blue Lake Wastewater Treatment Plant. Siphons are problematic in that they become an air dam to the air that's naturally ventilating down a sewer. So if you have an air dam, that air has to go somewhere, and so it ends up being released right in that general location. So we've identified these two areas. We're heading into preliminary design, selecting technologies to address the odor issues at both area number 1, as well as the area at number 2. If we can go to the next slide. At the location right ahead of the wastewater treatment plant, Blue Lake Wastewater Treatment Plant, we have a property at 6100 County Road 101 East. And that is actually the location of one of the first siphons, that perennial stream I was talking about. This is about half a mile to the west of the wastewater treatment plant. And in 2017, and I'll go to the next slide, we went through and had to replace pieces of pipe which were corroding, as well as replace the siphon structures that went underneath that perennial stream. And we did some lining of the interceptor that was to the east of there, or to the west of there and the east of there. And if we go to the next picture, we'll actually see the siphons. We rebuilt the siphon that goes underneath the creek. So I wanted to give you a little look at some of our construction pictures to see what our construction involves. The property at which the siphon is located in the
Hey, Adam,
first place.
can I interrupt? I'm just curious, looking
Sure.
at this picture, what is actually the siphon?
The siphon is the 3 barrels. You see 2 of them have been constructed. They're constructed of ductile iron pipe, and they come out of the structure and they actually duck down or head down in grade and go under the creek. You don't see the creek really well in this picture. That's because it's being pumped around through those 2 green pieces of PVC on the side. You can see that's a little bit wet. It's always wet crossing a stream. And then those pipes will actually come back up into another structure. So we call that an inverted siphon, and that the flow will simply pass down and go underneath objects that you can't cross or can't go through, like a stream or a highway. And so you have an inverted siphon to get around those vertical objects or vertical features. So I was going to say, does that answer your question, I should ask, Mr. Chair?
Sure does. Thank you very much.
Okay. At this very property right here where this siphon is located is that property identified in the previous slide as 101 East on 6901 or the 6100 of Highway 101 East. And that property, we needed easements to do, excuse me, the work that was along there, the replacing of those pipe sections, the replacement of that siphon. And so we acquired easements, temporary easements through a condemnation. The condemnation is still outstanding on that piece of property. So there was an interest in seeking to actually purchase the property, since it's not only ideal for us to locate new odor control facilities, but it would provide a final resolution to that condemnation. So with that, the last slide, if we move ahead, our proposed action is that the Metropolitan Council authorize the acquisition of the real property located at 6100 County Road 101 East in Shakopee, necessary for the construction of odor control facilities planned as part of the Shakopee Interceptor Odor Improvements Project. And with that, the last slide, if you've got more questions, I'd be pleased to answer them.
Questions for Mr. Gordon? Is there a motion to approve?
Wolf moves approval.
Sterner second.
Roll call.
Fredson,
Aye.
Sterner,
Aye.
Vento,
Aye.
Wolf, Zarin,
Aye.
and Lindstrom.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, perhaps Mr. Gordon again, or Mr. Schwartz again, with an interceptor pipe in place rehabilitation contract. Mr. Schwartz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, my name is Jeff Schwartz. I'm the Minneapolis Area Program Manager for the MCS Interceptor Engineering Department. I'm here to present business item number 2021-119, which is a request to award and execute a contract to construct an Interceptor 1MN341 pipe and pipe rehabilitation project. Next slide, please. The segment of MCS Interceptor 1MN341 that would be rehabilitated under this project is located under 38th Street South between 26th Avenue South and Edmond Boulevard, as shown by the black line on this slide, or the red line on this slide. Next slide, please. This segment of the interceptor was constructed in 1986 during the council's combined sewer separation program. As shown on the left, a corrugated metal pipe sanitary sewer was installed within the existing City of Minneapolis brick storm sewer. At that time, installing pipes inside pipes was the most cost-effective and technically feasible way to separate sanitary from storm sewer flows in highly developed neighborhoods because there was adequate storm sewer capacity. Smoke testing of the corrugated metal pipe in November 2018 identified over 30 defects, including joint separations and holes. One of the more severely damaged areas of the pipe is shown on the right. The defects need repair to eliminate commingling of the storm and sanitary sewers during wet weather events and preserve the capacity of the sanitary sewer. MCS and the City of Minneapolis are currently conducting a joint study to address storm sewer capacity issues as well. Next slide, please. These drawings show typical repairs that will be done as part of this project. On the right is a detail showing the access structures that will be installed into the crown of the storm sewer so the corrugated metal pipe can be accessed to make repairs and conduct future inspections and cleaning. The detail on the top left shows the geopolymer on the top left, shows the geopolymer mat that will be installed over the crown of the corrugated metal pipe after the defects are repaired. The mat will fortify the repairs and protect the repairs from damage that storm sewer debris scouring can cause. The access structures need to be installed during the summer and fall so the repair work can be done in the winter when the potential for stormwater to come down the pipe is minimal and the geopolymer mat will have appropriate time to cure. Next slide, please. There are 7 bids received ranging from $6,508,850 to $11,195,893. PCI Roads was the lowest responsible bidder at $6,508,850. Next slide, please. The proposed action is that the Metropolitan Council authorize its regional administrator to award and execute a contract for Interceptor 1MN341 Pipe and Pipe Rehabilitation Project 807618, Contract 21P064 to PCI Roads LLC to install 13 maintenance holes and rehabilitate 8,200 feet of pipe and pipe interceptor in an amount not to exceed $6,508,850. Next slide, please. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Do you have any questions? If not, my contact information is listed there.
Any questions for Mr. Schwartz? It looks like this project just, and I'm getting a little bit of an echo. Maybe mute yourself. Try this again. Good, better. Looks like this project just stops Like the western edge is just over 55, I think. Basically, my question is, it doesn't get anywhere near 38th in Chicago.
No, it does, Mr. Chair. It does stop on the west side of Hiawatha, and that's where the end of the pipe and pipe installation is at. So everything upstream of that is just a straight sanitary sewer pipe. So yes, we're 25th Avenue there.
Very good. Other questions,
This council members here.
please?
Chair Lindstrom, my question is, how you get corrugated pipe around the corner? Does it flex?
Mr. Chair and council members, this is a straight shot. So there's no corners on this one. So it's 8,200 feet and it just drains straight down. It goes from 48 inch to 52 inch compressed. So it's a corrugated metal pipe that they actually have to push down and form into that oval fashion.
Understood. Thank you.
Is there a motion?
Wolf moves approval.
7 seconds.
Thank you. Roll call.
I'm sorry, who sunk it then?
Councilmember Zirin.
Thank you very much. Fredson?
Aye.
Sterner?
Aye.
Bento?
Aye.
Wolf?
Aye.
Zarin?
Aye.
And Lindstrom.
Aye.
Thank you.
All right. Next up, another interceptor project.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
You're a regular here, Mr. Schwartz.
Well,
I don't think you need to introduce yourself again.
Okay, well, I'm here to present business item number 2021-120, which is request to award and execute a contract to construct the Interceptor 1MN 310 rehabilitation from 15th to 8th Avenue North project. Next slide, please. MCS Interceptor 1MN 310, shown by the black line on this slide, was built under 2nd Street North in 1932. The smaller City of Minneapolis sanitary sewer of similar age parallels the MCS Interceptor at a shallower depth. The city is planning to remove and replace 2nd Street and all underlying utilities, including their sanitary sewer, in the area shown in light blue starting in the spring of 2022. The city requested that MCS complete repairs to our facilities prior to the start of their work to minimize conflicts between construction contractors, minimize disruption to the public, and streamline public communications. Inspection of our facilities determined that condition 4 pipe deterioration is present between 15th Avenue and 3rd Avenue, and that a siphon under the Bassett Creek near 8th Avenue had never been inspected. Based on this information, we'll install temporary conveyance piping from 16th Ave to 7th Ave, shown in bluish gray, rehabilitate the deteriorated pipe between 15th Ave and 8th Ave, shown in gray, and then inspect the siphon, and do this all by the spring of 2022 as requested by the city. We'll be planning to repair the siphon if needed and the downstream pipe to 3rd Avenue in the future. Next slide, please. These photos show the condition 4 deterioration in the sewer pipe on the left, the siphon inlet structure on the top right, where you can see just the top of the gratings of the pipe. So like going back to Adam's photos where they had the pipe going down into the ground, that's exactly what we've got here. So the box fills up to the top of those pipes and then pushes it down to the next structure. So that needs to be dewatered for inspection. On the bottom right is also an area that's a maintenance hole, shows a deterioration. A lot of those are brick and the mortar's missing on them. Next slide, please. These photos show typical cured in place pipe lining construction areas and equipment layouts, including temporary conveyance piping, pumps, and traffic controls on the left, and installation of the lining before curing on the right. Next slide, please. 5 bids ranging from $2,706,093 to $4,134,157 were received. Michaels Corporation was the lowest responsible bidder at $2,706,093. The engineer's estimate of $1,806,834 was 34% lower than the lowest bid due to an underestimation of temporary conveyance costs, which increased when the conveyance pipe was shifted from the west to the east side of 2nd Street and buried under cross streets and driveways to minimize traffic impacts, and also underestimation of CIPP lining costs, which recently spiked as a result of shortages caused by the ice storm in Texas, where most of the materials are manufactured. Next slide, please. The proposed action is that the Metropolitan Council authorize the regional administrator to award and execute a contract for Interceptor 1 MN 310 rehabilitation from 15th to 8th Avenue North, Project 807667, Contract 21P007 to Michaels Corporation for the rehabilitation of 1,850 feet of interceptor and 5 maintenance holes in an amount not to exceed $2,706,093. Next slide, please. And thank you again, Mr. Chair, and I'll take any questions.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Questions? I will entertain a motion.
Vento
Wolf
moves
approval
approval.
again.
Let's go Vento and then Wolf seconds. Sound good?
Woo!
All right, roll call, please.
Rudson,
Aye.
Sterner,
Aye.
Vento,
Aye.
Wolf,
Aye.
Zarin,
Aye.
and Lindstrom.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ned Smith, it's that time of year again. Welcome back.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's my favorite time of year.
Hopefully one of these years we'll be able to get together and have these meetings with our ratepayers. I think it's going to be virtual this year, but maybe next year.
It will, and we'll talk about that. So good afternoon, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. My name is Ned Smith. I'm the Director of Pretreatment and Finance, and I'm here today with an information item. We call this our MCS Budget Concepts, Rates, and Workshops, and it's meant to be an overview of what our proposed 2022 budget will be. And then we'll walk through some of the basics of that budget, and then we'll share kind of our public outreach approach, and then the schedule for bringing that feedback back, and then moving this into the larger council budget. Next slide, please. So jumping right into the executive summary, most important things to know. For our proposed sources for 2021, our wastewater charge is increasing 4% from last year. You may remember in 2021, we only increased our rate 2% in anticipation of fiscal complications from the pandemic. Most cities are pretty healthy and have not experienced the loss that was expected. So we feel confident in that 4%. And it's just as a reminder, no city will actually see exactly 4%. There are 2 determinants to a city's increase. One is what we're doing with the overall budget, but the second is their flow from 2020. We use the prior year's flow as an allocation benchmark. So if a city had 10% of the flow in 2020, then they will pay 10% of our total MWC for 2022. The cities generally appreciate that because they get budget certainty. It's no different, though there is some volatility in there, but no different than if you were doing it real time. If you had a wet year and all of a sudden your flows went up, if we were doing it on a per gallon basis, you would experience that same volatility in the year. This allows them to plan for it. We sent the proposed rates out in early May. And so most cities have seen it and are starting to build their 2022 budgets. So they are aware of the changes that we are proposing. Our total sources is going to increase 3.2%. So sources, all the rest of that is the wastewater charge, SAC, industrial waste fees, and then also some of our interest. And I'll talk through some changes that we're seeing there. Our proposed uses, which is like our expenses, is also expecting to increase 3.2%. Some of that, it appears balanced. Some of that is because we're using some reserves to make up for some deficits, but overall, our sources and uses balance. And then just some key rates. So these aren't necessarily revenue increases. These are the actual rates that we charge our customers. Our sewer availability charge is going to be flat at $24.85, $2,485 per SAC unit. A SAC unit is the residential equivalent. We have not increased that rate since January 1st of 2014. I'd love to say it's because of the fiscal brilliance of my predecessor or me, but that's actually a reflection of the robust development that we continue to see in the Twin Cities region. And I'll walk through that when we get to some of our SAC slides. Our industrial strength charge is going to go up by 5%. That's mostly a factor of math. We take our wastewater charge and we back out the charges that don't apply to strength, which is mostly our interceptors. Since it doesn't cost us any more to transport industrial strength, it just costs us more to treat it. So that's really focused on our plant charges. And that is a slightly higher percent of our total, actually, because our debt is going down. And I'll walk through some of that in the next couple slides. And then our industrial permit fees by policy are pegged to our wastewater charge. So if the wastewater charge goes up 4%, industrial permit fees goes up by 4%. There is a tilde because we round them off to the nearest $25. So it's not a $38.14, just to keep the math simple. So those are the high level. Next slide, please. So as we get into our revenue sources, I do want to remind everyone that we are a fee-for-service agency. I like to say you flush, you pay, you don't flush, you don't pay. We do not collect any property taxes. We do not take any state dollars, nor do we take in any federal dollars, with the exception of an occasional pass-through grant. But for actually running and operating our system, we are 100% dependent on the fees that we collect from our 110 customer communities, as well as our industrial customers. So overall, this pie chart looks pretty similar to years past. You can see our biggest chunk is municipal wastewater charges at 74%. The transfer from SAC is 18%. That's a little bit above last year because we're using a little bit more of our SAC reserves to pay for PAYGO, and I'll talk about that a little bit more in detail. But we are getting a little bit more of our revenue then from SAC, from the SAC reserve fund. And then we have our industrial waste charges are about flat at 5%. And then other, the biggest pieces in there is our other post-employment benefits adjustment. And we are using $2 million from our operating reserve for rate mitigation, so we can keep our rates low for our customers. Next slide, please. On the uses by category, this chart also looks pretty similar to years past. The biggest change is we had some last minute adjustments. Debt service should be 47%, which is a little bit lower than last year. So our debt service, we'll talk about the bubble in a minute, but it is leveling off and we're seeing some light at the end of the tunnel from some of the growth that we are used to seeing from debt service. So that's actually at 47% of our total. Salaries and benefits is about the same at 23%. And the other biggest change is our interdivisional services, which is our centralized services we get from the regional administration. This would include HR, finance, legal, risk, procurement, and most importantly and largest is information services. So this is IS and IT. And they have some big projects that they are one-time projects that are coming through the system. We'll see those increases also in 2023. So that's a little bit up at 7% versus 6% in years past. All the others are pretty consistent. We don't see any huge increases. Biggest increases we saw for 2022, rent and utilities. Our utilities are going up a little bit based on expenses from Excel and rate changes there. And we're also seeing an increase in our chemicals. Some of that's due to increase in the actual cost of chemicals. Some of that's due to our increased odor management program, where we're using more chemicals to control our odors out in the field, as one of our business items showed through this evening. And then also PayGo is pay as you go. That's where we use operating funds to fund our capital program, so we don't take out debt for that. And that is also 3%, which is pretty consistent with years prior. Next slide, please. Well, as you saw, almost a quarter of our budget is from labor. This is bumping up slightly in 2022. We're still at about half of where we were in the 90s, but honestly, we're seeing some growth in the region, as well as growth in our system as we add plants and we add more interceptor odor management programs and other opportunities to improve our service. There are a few people additional. Most of this is based on overtime. We actually, in terms of the number of employees we have, on any given day, it varies because people retire and people get hired. But on any given day, we have about 635 to 645 actual employees. And then the numbers are higher because some of them work more than 2,080 hours a year based on contract agreements as well as overtime. We do continue to have a vacancy factor in there of 25. We do have folks retiring, and we know we can't backfill them on the next day. So we have vacant seats, and we do plan for that so that we don't overcharge our customers and pay them to pay salaries that aren't there. You know, our biggest risks around here are attrition rates. Personally, I don't have any data to back this up, but my gut tells me we're probably going to see a few more retirements this year than we did in 2020. I think a lot of people were holding off now that the pandemic is now that we are getting vaccinated and there are some things are opening back up. I think we're going to see some more retirements in 2022. And then, of course, our healthcare costs as we are self-insured. But all in all, to go from 703 to 705 is less than a 1% increase. So, or maybe it's a 1% to 2% increase. So I feel comfortable with that. Our other driver there is just the cost of our salaries, which go up 3 to 4% per year. Next slide, please. So we've been for years now talking about the debt service bubble. And just as a brief reminder, this is left over from the Great Recession back in 2008, 2009, 2010 to meet some particularly anemic SAC collection as development shut down. We pushed some of our principal out into the future, and that future was basically 18 through, originally it was about 22 or 23. So we saw our debt service increasing by $7 to $9 million per year. So if our debt service in 2019 was 140 million, then in 2020 it was 149 million. Those aren't exact numbers, but that's roughly where we were. So that's just showing how we had a $9 million increase. And if you do some quick math in your head, you look at a 3 to 4% MWC increase. The MWC is around 230 million. So if you increase that by 3%, you're only getting about 8 or 9 million in increased revenue. And you can see that we had our debt service increasing by 8 or 9 million. So our debt service bubble was consuming all of our increased revenue. Fortunately, that has slowed down. And this is driven by two things. We're pretty much for 2022, actually, our debt service is going to be flat. So I would call the debt service bubble over. And that's driven by two things. Most importantly is the fantastic work of our Treasury and RA Finance Department to refinance some of our debt, our outstanding debt from 2012 and 2013. They did one offering back in the fall that saved us about $400,000 a year. and they did another offering just this spring, about 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago, and that's going to save us another almost $1.5 million per year in debt service. So that has trimmed our debt service quite a bit. And then we've also, our trends in our capital spend and the amount of borrowing that we need to do has been a little lower than we projected. And so that also saves us money, saves us debt service. If we're not borrowing it, we're not paying for it. So that is some awesome, fantastic news for us. Not only is it the debt service bubble waning, if not gone, we are actually going to see our debt service drop in the latter half of the decade. So some great news there. And that feeds into the next slide, please. So pay as you go is the, again, as I said, that's using operating funds. As you can see, it's been pretty flat for the last couple of years. We have been reluctant to really charge our customers anymore to go out and increase what we use for PayGo because our interest rates are so low. And the refinance was less than 2%. Now that was on a different term, but I imagine we are still going to stay around 2 to 2.5% on any future offerings. And I can't quote the PayGo off the top of my head, but not PayGo, excuse me, the PFA loans that we just closed on were also less than 2%. So it's pretty hard to justify charging our customers more when PayGo, the savings are not as great if you pay up front when debt is this cheap. But what's interesting in here is this is where we are seeing the impact of using our SAC reserve. You'll see in a few slides that our SAC reserve is quite healthy. And so we are using that to help with our ratepayer charge. And the way we're doing that is we're going to use our SAC reserve funds to pay for PayGo instead of operating funds. Now, there is some specific math we have to do behind this in order to make sure that we're compliant with the statute, because the statute tells us we can only use SAC to pay for the capacity portion or the empty portion of our service of our system, which also means it only pays about 30 to 35% of our debt service. So when we use PayGo, when we use the SAC reserve to pay for PayGo, we keep a record of that for the next 20 years so that we aren't double billing SAC for the debt service that's due. It's like SAC is paying its debt ahead of schedule, and we keep a record of that to make sure that we are compliant so that SAC is only paying for capacity on the system. Next slide, please. So overall, that puts us another good picture to show here. You can see back in 2018, our total outstanding debt peaked at $1.36 billion, and that's coming down to below $1.3 billion. Around $1,270 is where it's going to be for the next couple of years, with a slight bump up in 2027. This you might say, well, what does that mean? Is that a lot? That seems like a lot. Is that a lot? Next slide, please. But relative to our peers, it puts us in a very good position. So this is debt per capita. This is somewhat old data. We're going to get a new set of data in 2020, but this is based on a survey from the National Association of Clean Water Agencies that they send out to all wastewater utilities. And these are within our peer group, which is wastewater utilities that treat more than 100 million gallons a day, or that serve around more than 2 million people. You can see that our debt per capita is in the lowest. I can't do that math in my head, but I would assume it's in the lowest quintile or quartile. And really what's driving that is many of those that are way up in the stratosphere, Atlanta, Boston, Seattle, Cincinnati, those all have consent decrees from the EPA, mostly around combined sewer overflows, which is where they have their sewer and their stormwater are combined. So when there's a heavy rain event, all of that rainwater goes to their plants, and their plants they can't handle it. So they do it's called a combined sewer overflow. It's where they actually release untreated water into their receiving body. Because in the 80s, our municipal partners took the bold future-looking step of separating storm from sanitary. We don't have those issues nearly to the extent. We do get a little from our leaky pipes, from our system and from the municipality system. And so that's why we have an inflow and infiltration program to reduce that. And we have seen massive improvements. So when we have a rainy situation, we don't release any wastewater into our systems. And so we don't have a consent decree from the EPA telling us we have to spend 10 or $20 billion in the next 10 to 15 years. So that's why our debt per capita is so low. It's also why that low debt per capita leads to low rates as well. And we'll see that in a minute. Next slide, please. So this is just a graphical representation of our SAC rate increases. And you can see on January 1 of 2014, it went up 2.1%. And for the 9 years that follow, we have not increased it. Next slide, please. Which again, I'd love to say it's because of fantastic management, but it's just because of the wonderful region that we're in. These are the actual units, SAC units. This is residential and commercial. And you can see that even in 2020, despite the commercial slowdown, residential was still very, very high. As we had a lot of residential activity. So any apartment, multifamily home, single family home, a single unit has to pay a single SAC. And our residential development has continued to be strong. It looks like it's down to 2019, but that was a record year. But if you draw a trend line through from 2009 on, you can see we're on a good pace. And also, our initial numbers for 2021 also look healthy. I don't have quite enough numbers of months of data to declare a trend, but it is up to 2020. I can say that. And so we are optimistic about SAC for 2021 as well. But all of these numbers have been very positive and have helped us to build our reserve. So next slide, please. So you can see the blue is our SAC reserve and our orange is the council minimum balance. Minimum balance is the average of 5 years of SAC. So you can see we're well above, and that's why we feel comfortable using our SAC reserve to help us with PAYGO, because we feel like we have plenty in the reserve. Reserve can also be a tool if we see a drop off in SAC. The SAC bill that comes due every year is fixed. It's based on a percentage of the debt service that's due. And so if SAC comes in lower than the debt service that's due, we'll continue to rely on our reserve to make up that difference. So we are not anticipating a SAC increase, a SAC rate increase for at least 2 to 4 years out, depending on, again, many factors. But we feel comfortable that 2485 is going to be the right number for quite a while per SAC unit. Next slide, please. So this slide will look identical to what we showed last year, but I never hesitate to share that we are 40% less than the national average for our peer agencies. And again, this is based on a survey from, it was done in 2017 on 2016 rates. They did another survey in 2020, and we expect those results to come out this summer. I don't anticipate that we'll be much off of 40% lower than our peer agencies. So we're very proud of that. We think that's a great economic advantage for the region. Next slide, please. So what's our long-term perspective? Just a reminder of where we've been. We set a 5-year promise back in 2018 to keep our rates at 4% or lower. For 2018 through 2020, we have honored that. 2021, we actually dropped it even lower to 2%, which was a bit of a challenge, but we made it. And now in 2022, we're going to go back up to 4%. And our long-term goal after that, somewhat, we're going to have to monitor what happens with the pandemic and its impacts. If the recovery is not as strong as it has been, we'll need to adjust to that and partner with our cities to charge a rate that's appropriate. But in the long term, we do want to stay less than or equal to our wastewater inflation rate. And wastewater inflation rate is not necessarily a specific index you can go look up on the Bureau of Labor and Standards, Bureau of Labor and Statistics, but it is what we want to do is look at the costs that impact us. So what's fuel doing, what's labor doing, what are chemicals doing, things that we have to pay for, what are the trends there, what are utilities doing, and we will match our increase to that. Next slide, please. So this is a breakdown of the industrial rates. We talked through some of those earlier. that our strength charge and our brewery charge per barrel are increasing 5.4%. And then the load charges are staying flat, and that's because we've removed, we used to charge for interceptors as part of that because the loads were dropping off at remote sites and traveling through an interceptor. We no longer receive through our interceptors except for one at the Fridley site. So we now receive most of our waste, load waste at the plants themselves, which don't have an interceptor component. So we are phasing out the charging of that interceptor component, and that's why those are flat. The permit fee we talked through earlier, that's pegged to our MWC, and then the general permit fee, that's $100 to $500. It would, if we increase that, it would cost us more to reprint the postcards than it would to actually collect the additional revenue. So we leave that flat to last year. Next slide, please. So in terms of sharing this with our customers, we have had our industrial workshops. We met with our load haulers, we met with our brewers, and we also have met with our standard industrial customers to get their feedback on these proposed rates. They were a little hazier at that time. I think we were estimating about a 4 to 4.6% increase, so it's bumped up a little. So we will reach out through our open channel to make sure that they are aware of that. And then May 11th, here we are today sharing the general rates. And then we have two customer forums coming up, May 25th and June 10th. Those are both going to be virtual. There's pluses and minuses to that. I think there's no substitute for a face-to-face meeting. We use those as a great way to develop kind of a workshops with our individual departments. So we will miss those. However, in years past, when we did this last year, our attendance almost doubled. So we get a better outreach. I think in the future, when it's safe to meet in person again, we'll probably do a hybrid approach. We'll either have our live ones also virtual, or we'll do one live and one virtual to make sure, particularly from the outlying areas, it's easier for them to get to. But we have those two. May 25th, Chair Zelli will be speaking, and then June 10th, Chair Lindstrom will be speaking. And so we encourage all council members, not just Environment Committee members, to join us for those. They're a wonderful outreach opportunity. It's amazing to hear what our customers are thinking about and get their feedback. So I strongly encourage all to join us at one of those. And then July 13th, we will come back to this committee and share the feedback from those virtual meetings, from the webinars. Also, not only do we share our budget, but we'll also be talking about our capital program, the allocation for how MWCs are determined. We'll talk about our portal, the customer portal and the improvements there, and then other updates around the system. So it's not just about our budget. In fact, they've been getting me to speak less and less, which I think is wise. But it's really about how the overall MCES is serving our customers. So July 13th, we come back and share that feedback and any changes. If we've made any changes to our rates, we'll present them there. And then that should read July 28th. We'll send that to the broader council for approval of our rates. And then that gets folded into the larger budget, the larger council budget on August 25th. And then beyond that is a public comment period, and then December they're approved. And next slide, please. So with that, I will stand for any questions.
Thank you. Excellent presentation. I have a quick question, as others may be thinking of more questions, but I'm curious about debt service and understanding that we have the new plant at Hastings, new plant in Crow River. How are we able to get these new plants online and remain pretty steady debt service? How do we build new plants and not add a lot of debt?
So there's a couple of factors going in there. First and foremost is Janine Clancy and her outstanding team. They are aware of our debt service concerns, and they manage the overall capital program to meet to keep that reasonable. The capital programs will be increasing over time. Right now, it's around 120 to 150 million a year, and there's going to be a couple of years where that's going to bump up to 150 to 180 million per year. I would also say, though, that those are pretty spread out. And in fact, some of those impacts probably won't be on the time frame that I just showed you. I think 2027 was the last projection I had for debt service, actually for our debt level. But those plants are even the construction of those plants is spread out over multiple years, up to 5 years. So even if a new plant costs $30-40 million, you'll only see 10 or 15 or 20 million in any given year. And then I also, all credit to Janine and her team, they're able to balance that across the other requirements of the system. So good planning and time is our friend, because those are in the mid to even later part of the decade, and which gives us a little time to spread that cost out.
Great, thank you. Other questions? Councilmember Wolf.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Not a question, just a comment. Ned said he couldn't take credit for the flat SAC, but I actually can, because in the budget process for 2015, staff had recommended a increase again because they were nervous and wanted to hedge their bets for the future. And I said, no, things are looking okay. Let's keep it flat and see what happens. We can always adjust the next year. And as you can see, the next year and the next year and the next year after that got better. So I will take credit for the flattening of the SAC.
Our businesses, thank you. Speaking on behalf of all businesses and residents. Other questions or comments? All right. Great presentation, Ned.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I neglected to thank the group at the beginning. I want to thank Matt Selmeyer, our budget manager, Dan Schuler, our financial analyst, and also all of the department managers who, through COVID, from remote locations or on-site locations, still managed to build our budget on time and within the constraints and targets that we established. It was an incredible amount of work for our teams, and I'm very grateful to all of MCES for pulling through and delivering a great budget. So thanks to those folks.
Well said. Absolutely. We second that.
So thank you much.
Thank you. And that takes us to the general manager's report. Hello, hello.
Hi, I'm using headphones. I'm actually just around the corner from the chambers today. Had a full day arbitration, and so I just slid into this meeting from that. I do remember that conversation that Wendy Wolf was referring to, where we were nervous about SAC because we'd had that big down ramp that we were worried might sneak up on us again. But it was a good call, and it has served us well. I also want to thank folks tonight. As you saw, there was a couple items added to the agenda. A lot of people and staff, including procurement, Janine's folks, Susan in particular, did some real rush work to get those 2 items ready for tonight. And of course, as you heard, we weren't able to post them because some updates were being done on the system. They'll get updated tomorrow, so everything will be in order. But the good news of that is it looks like we should be able to cancel the upcoming meeting that we would have, which is in conjunction with that holiday at the end of May. So now that the pandemic's winding down, you may be able to take some trips or visit some folks that you didn't get to do last year. So that extra long weekend might be helpful for your plans. So I want to appreciate all the staff that scrambled to make that happen so that we could allow ourselves a little break in that schedule. That's the extent of what I have tonight. We've been getting ready for this budget coming up. I think we've got a good plan, and I do encourage you to attend one of the sessions, and I think you'll find it interesting. Of course, you've heard this information, but the interaction and the other information we'll share with the communities, I think you'll find of interest. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And you're right, those are great experiences for all of us to tap into. And appreciate the mad scramble in the last 24 hours or so to get this agenda in order and give us a day off, give all of us a day off in another couple of weeks. So with that, we are adjourned.